The baseball card junk wax era is a period between 1986 to 1993 when manufacturers overproduced and oversaturated the market with sports cards.
Baseball card collecting is America's fastest growing hobby. Hi, I'm Mike Schmidt. Now you can own the complete official 1990 Topps baseball card collection with all 792 cards. Topps is America's premier baseball card company, but this may be your last chance to get the 1990 set. If you call now, you'll receive a bonus collector's item, a special edition bronze baseball card medallion honoring superstar Nolan Ryan. It's an exact replica of the official Topps 1990 card.
If you were a kid growing up in the mid to late 1980s or into the 1990s, you may have been one of the millions of kids who collected baseball cards. I know there were other sports cards out there like basketball, football, and hockey, but for all intents and purposes, I'm going to go focus on the era of baseball cards since I was a part of that time. Let's take a look at the time frame known as the junk wax era, generally known as the period from late 1980s until the early 1990s. It was when the card manufacturers like Topps, Fleer, Donruss, Score, Upper Deck, Leaf, and others pumped out millions of cards to the point that it oversaturated the market and left the cards worth significantly less than similar cards released earlier in the 1980s. The junk wax era roughly covers the period of 1986 to 1993 when the card companies were overproducing cards and the leagues were over-licensing to anyone who wanted in on the gold rush. For that reason, there are a lot of cards out there from this era, which makes them relatively cheap. There are also a lot of unopened boxes, and the steroids and controversy to the overproduction stigma, and many of the rookie cards of this period pale in comparison to those from a decade earlier or even a decade later in many cases. The junk wax era started around 1986 with the release of the 1986 Topps, Fleer, Donruss, and to some degree Sports Flicks. Back then, there was no internet, eBay, WhatsApp, or any other internet websites to find the value of cards. It was in periodicals like Baseball Card Monthly, Beckett, and other trade newspapers. Beckett magazine was like the holy Bible for collectors. The players of the day graced the covers like rock stars, and rookies and veteran players alike were on hot and cold lists like the celebrity tabloids, who's who of the sports world. In sports card collecting, wax refers to the unopened boxes of cards or packs which were generally sealed in a wax-like plastic packaging during that time. There were some companies that used foil packaging, but for the most part, most companies packed their cards in wax. Topps, the leading company of baseball cards at the time, and known as the Topps Chewing Gum Company, had once placed more emphasis on the gum than on the cards, and would place a stick of gum on the back of the deck, leaving the last card with a silhouette of gum as well as the wax seal mark on the last card. How many times do you remember that being the best card on the deck and it being essentially ruined by the gum stains? A few publications reported that card companies overproduced their products and began tailoring them more to the investment class rather than the hobby class, and when the cards were produced for those in the hobby, they were often low quality, low frill, and frankly flat out boring. According to one estimate, companies produced 81 billion cards per year in the late 1980s and early 1990s. That shakes out to about 300 cards per person living in the United States. Cards were everywhere. Collectors from this era often hoarded these boxes and refused to open them, with the idea being that they would naturally increase in value over time, with the most valuable cards being those which were unopened. Lessons learned from when the older collectors of that time had collected in the 1950s and 1960s and their parents had thrown away their cards. finding out that as they got older, that those cards were worth a lot of money. The junk wax era was also the heyday for those local neighborhood card shops. Although you could buy your baseball cards or sports cards at places like drugstores, gas stations, grocery stores, and even convenience stores, the places that stick out most in my mind were those baseball card stores. It seemed like every city and town had one. Where I grew up in Orange County, I could name 4 of them in my hometown. It was always a bike ride there, or if you complained enough, you could get your mom or dad to take you down there. And more often or not, I would blow my whole allowance there. Back then, most cards were not graded or slabbed as they are called now. Cards were arranged neatly in large display cases in plastic sleeves called card savers, or if they were really valuable, in a plastic slab that were screwed down in place, essentially smashing and squashing that card. Prices were based on what Beckett told you they were worth. There was no comps or apps to tell you what sold in the last days, weeks, or months. It was based on that little black up or down triangle next to the price when you scrolled down lists in Beckett magazine. Cards on display were arranged by player or year, and it always seemed like cards that were listed for $5 or $10 were seen as super valuable and so expensive, especially to a 9-year-old who was lucky to have $2 in change in their pocket. Back then, it was all about opening packs. Who would want to spend $5 on a card if I could rip packs in order to find that card? It was the ultimate treasure hunt to pull the elusive 89 Upper Deck Griffey Rookie, or for me, the 89 Donruss Griffey Jr. Oh, and what about all those commons? Commons were those players that nobody ever heard of and had hundreds of them piled up in boxes, or even shoe boxes. And speaking of where to put them all, back in the 1980s, cards would go into binders, something that modern-day collectors would have a heart attack if they found people putting cards in plastic pages for all their friends to see. The ultimate display of wealth or bragging rights as a young kid was showing to your friends a page full of multiples of the same card. Nothing like showing off 9 cards of the same thing. Kids would put their valuable cards, usually worth over $2, in card savers. I remember thinking that putting them in card savers and using the card saver box was the ultimate show of being fancy. The common cards were relegated to shoe boxes or albums, but in the 1980s, we actually read the backs of their cards. We studied the numbers and learned the numbers and stats of the player. I even remembered where they lived too, but not in a stalker way, but it was always surprising to see that a player lived in your own hometown. For me, during that time, there were actually 5 current MLB players who lived in my town, and we all knew that. Many played for my hometown California Angels, not that Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. Thanks to the baseball cards, I can name pretty much every obscure player on any given team on the 1987-1988 top sets. Ask me now to name 5 players on my favorite team, the New York Yankees. I could, but I couldn't tell you the name of the 5 rookies or utility guys, or even the relief pitchers. If you mention the rookies of the day in the late 1980s and early 90s, you could probably name off Chris Sabo, Greg Jeffries, Todd Van Poppel, Brian Taylor, Ricky Jordan, Ben McDonald, Kevin Moss, or other can't-miss rookie phenoms. I was one of those guys who hoarded their rookies, hoping to cash in like Griffey Jr. Let's just say when I got back into collecting again, I decided to seek out those most iconic cards of that era and have them signed by them. The ultimate nerd fest. In the 1980s and early 1990s, collectors actually didn't meet or chat with each other online. They met at card shows or maybe even card shops. Card shows were big and were advertised in trade magazines or in the sports sections of the newspaper. Major league players would sign autographs for free and often appeared at sporting goods stores, malls, or even store grand openings. One other note, trading cards as it was known was common. Perhaps my biggest trade in my 14-year-old mind was trading 2 1989 Donruss Ricky Jordan rookies for a 1989 Upper Deck Ken Griffey Jr., a steal by today's standards, but a tough sell back when Ricky Jordan was touted as a rookie phenom. The 1989 Upper Deck set was hailed as a symbol of the junk wax era and started the trend of high-quality pictures, better cardstock, chase cards, and brought more kids into the hobby. The iconic Ken Griffey Jr.'s card number 1, which is now one of the most graded cards around, was produced in the millions and sent collectors scrambling to open packs to find this card. The kid's rookie card was a signal for change. It was the debut set from the card manufacturer Upper Deck, who shook up the collecting card world with improved glossy cardstock, inserts worth chasing, counterfeit defying holograms, and foil wrappers instead of wax. My favorite set back then was either the 1987 Topps baseball card set with the wood grain borders. It was the first cards that I had ever collected when I started, or it was the 1989 Donruss with the 1980 style colors. I opened a ton of packs. The junk wax era ended at the same time many collectors my age had grown out of it. For me, I stopped collecting in 1992. Life happened. Pretty soon it was girls, cars, sports, and of course college. And then it was marriage, and then kids. Like many others in my generation, my cards were put in storage, left in the garage, or left at my parents' house in their closet. The junk wax era came to an end in 1993, about a year after I had quit collecting. By now, there was a clear perception that production had run amok, which led to the cooling off of the hobby. Throw in the dawn of the steroid era in the mid-1990s and the baseball lockout in 1994, and the sport as a whole took a serious hit around this time as well. The 10,000 card shops that sprung up during the junk wax era shrank to roughly 1,000. Today we're in an era where rookie cards are king. There are super rare cards, relics, base cards, inserts, parallels, autographs, rookie versions of cards, one of ones, one of tens, and so on. Cards are slab, and those cards are now imprisoned in their little plastic cases, designated with a number whose value is based on whether it is a 10, or its value diminished substantially if it is an 8 or a 9. A difference of numbers is night and day for the value of the card. A long time ago, there were two grading scales, mint or near mint. Now, cards are put through scanners to evaluate whether they're perfectly centered and other factors that is almost based on science. Values are also now based on the performance of that athlete in real time. An injury, an incident off the field, or even a bad season can make that card value drop. Essentially, it is the stock market, buying futures, and the market affected and based on speculation. I believe that we may be in another one of these junk wax eras, or somewhere calling the junk slab era. The hobby today is a lot different than when I started collecting. Money is the focus now rather than just collecting for fun. Sure, it can be fun, but I feel if you're collecting baseball cards for the investment, you might be wasting your money. That's just my opinion though. Leave a comment below and tell me what you think. Thanks. So what do you remember about this place? Leave a comment or a suggestion for a future video below. And if you haven't already, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.
Bringing back memories from the good old days. That's super cool, man.